Wonderful. Now we're going to hand over to Frank Rubino, who's going to give us a deep dive on some common architectural patterns and the benefits that they can bring to your MDM solution. So over to you, Frank.
I'm going to talk to you a little bit, use my experience in architecture and as a solutions director at MarkLogic to talk about some of the architecture that is behind these MDM systems. And, you know, we just had this fantastic presentation by Gary talking about people and figuring out who's a person and figuring out answers to questions about people in a mastering context. There's even more before you even start to master. You know, what business processes are your people connected to? Where do they live? And you know, what's their credit score? I think I saw my social security number on one of Gary's sample records. But you know, you have to manage also that sort of secure information. To get this business capability, we build systems, right? We build large or small enterprise systems for managing our data. And those systems follow principles, and the principles, and this is kind of how I like to think about architecture in general, is sort of driven by principles, which is a slightly different thing. I mean, ultimately the principles are informed by business and business initiative. You know, initiatives shape and guide those principles. But when you break it back into the sort of architecture domain, you really are starting, I think, with these kinds of just principled ideas. How are you gonna? What does your application have to do? What does it not do? And you come up with a certain number of these kinds of principles for MDM, which I have characterized here as, and I'll just go through them. I know you can read them, but I want to talk a little bit about each one. So, authority. MDM has to provide an authoritative version of the data. And that means everything from the truth to the truth-based to trust-based mastering that Gary showed us, where you have a score for your confidence about the particular veracity of a piece of data, to the provenance and lineage that we also saw in Gary's demo, where we saw how the data was derived from which files and which processes, and that authority is what the business depends on to be able to make decisions. The second principle I wanted to talk about is security. We're sharing this authoritative data in an environment where some people need to see some parts of it, other people need to see different parts of it, and if it's public facing, there's yet another sort of lens that you need to look at it through. And naturally, it's stuff you want to protect. So the MDM solution that you wind up creating needs to provide the security to protect your data and allow for safe sharing of it. And the last principle that I want to talk to you about here, as we kind of lay the groundwork for what's coming up, is this principle of economy. And economy is a fairly big principle. It includes everything from low code, no code environments where you're actually spending less work hours and less work effort to get a certain result that's economic, to being able to scale your underlying system on commodity hardware and be able to spin up cloud instances and pay as you go. And the system, your MDM system, supports that capability, for instance. Economy also comes in with high availability and disaster recovery. So you have a system that is going to be resilient to loss. So economy is a kind of a broad concept, and operational conservatism is a way that I like to think about it, where you're spending the least amount of effort on and getting the most value out of it, and that can happen because you've got a system that an MDM system that is driven largely by automation, let's say, or has an integration profile that decreases workload of maintaining that integration, tuning that integration, keeping those integrations running. And so these are the principles that one would want, that I would say one would want to follow as one architects an MDM solution. So you have principles. Now, your principles have to map to capabilities. That's sort of the second part of doing architecture, right? You sort of say, okay, I want to do this. Now, what is going to enable me to do that? And the important capabilities that I think an MDM system has to have are a flexible data model. And a flexible data model is a rather important piece that lets you do things like Gary showed, putting data in and searching it before you even build any kind of data model around it. So that's and also handling multiple forms of data. So we call MarkLogic, for instance, a multi-model database because it can handle scalar data, tabular data, hierarchical data like JSON and XML, and also semantic triple data. And semantic data and graph data becomes really important because MDM is concerned with relationships between data and and characterizing and enabling the exploration of the data through those relationships. We talked a bit about advanced security already. MarkLogic, for instance, and by the way, many other systems out there have role-based access control security. MarkLogic goes a few steps further with providing common criteria, government-grade security, and has a few extras like compartment-based security and encryption at rest and things like that you need to in an MDM system to provide for that kind of secure sharing that you want to do with all your great data that you created in the system. Your MDM system needs a way of mastering, and I think I would go so far as to say it needs smart mastering. Smart mastering is actually something that's going to allow you to take advantage of the flexible data model and being able to, and the relationships that you're going to discover in the data. Your system needs to do some sort of harmonization, whether that's transformations of data on these kind of ETL pipelines that then, that are then transformed from operational data stores into your MDM system and then pushed into your MDM system in a further transformational workload. That's your system. Your MDM system just has to have the capability to do those kind of data manipulation operations. In the modern world, we need connectors. MDM systems don't sort of live on their own in a little bubble. They are integrated into larger environments that have a lot of different subsystems and also third-party systems that are pushing data into your MDM environment. Connectors are also useful to consume the data, like Gary showed you those BI dashboards with the histograms of zip codes and showing mastering and stuff like that. Those that's because we have a connector that allows us to consume data out of a MarkLogic MDM system. And then flexible deployment is an important capability that gives you that economy of that really speaks to that economy principle, where you're going to be able to run your MDM system in the cloud, whatever cloud you choose, run it on premise, run a hybrid model, some on premise, some in the cloud, and have the resiliency in all of those deployments to be able to handle failures and to be able to elastically grow and shrink as the system needs demand. So those are the capabilities and the principles I really wanted to talk about. Given those, when you're designing, when you're architecting an MDM solution, you have some choices. And I characterize the choices as really coming down, at least for today, for this morning, to these kind of three questions. And the questions are: do you design an MDM that can synchronize with the source systems, or it's just a kind of a read-only reflection of the source system? Both those approaches are helpful to are used by our customers and are helpful in different use cases. Do you model new business entities, or are you going to leave? Are you going to basically leave your data, if it's tabular, intact in the kind of table structure that it has in the source system? And then are you going to, I think the third question, the third choice that I want to go into here is, are you building a registry style MDM system or a hub style? And I'll talk a little bit about the differences between those two systems. And so this is where I want to go with our talk this morning. So the first choice that I wanted to talk about is synchronization. So when you have a synchronized MDM, what that means to me is that you have this MDM system that is going to both read data from the systems of record, like here we're showing like a mortgage documents system of record that's being consumed by the MDM, mastered and maybe enriched, and then the enriched content is going to be pushed out from the MDM and synchronized back into the system of record repository. So that means, and so why would you do something like that? Well, you do get to create authoritative records that way. You also, because everything that passes through the MDM, and even if it's reconsumed with an authority. It's got the lineage and provenance that the MDM system has provided. And the other benefit, people do this because they have a lot of client systems on the system of record, and they don't want to have a big bang and reintegrate all those systems to the right side of the MDM. For instance, you might have some customer-facing application that integrates with this mortgage document system of record, and you want to leave that undisturbed while you start to put this whole mastering and enriching process in place with MDM. And you can do this, and you can do this incrementally, and you can continue to add new systems of record to the MDM processes that you create. And I also listed on the slide what I think MarkLogic brings to this scenario, what its capabilities are that allow you to really achieve this. And the most important one, I think, is ACID. The fact that MarkLogic has this transactional capability, ACID transactions that allow you to confidently and consistently process data across the whole synchronization chain. And sorry, I'm just not getting my arrow going here. There we go. Whoops, let's go back one. Yeah, synchronization. And then the second kind of choice that you're dealing with is, are you going to keep the original data structures and data forms that are in the source systems? Are they going to just migrate over to your MDM system, or are you going to do some remodeling of those tables and whatever resources you have in the source systems into business entities that are reformed, remodeled for new purposes and new consumption channels? So you have this choice of just sort of pulling the source information in there in its original form. For instance, here's an example where we have a customer and some order tables, and we're just going to bring them over from the source system and store them in the MDM system, and maybe do some maybe keep track in the MDM system, maybe master customer IDs or something like that. But we're going to basically keep intact what the representation of those customers and orders are. And again, this is a situation. The use cases are where there's largely one kind of data that you're managing in the use case, and in this case, it's pretty much kind of this ERP data, and it's pretty much relational data, and you want to basically have a low impact way of pulling this stuff into MDM, mastering it, and also continuing to provide the back end services on the source systems. And MarkLogic lets you do this, with its flexible data model. We can ingest data in any source from any source system and pull it in, and we can store it in its native form and index it and provide some services over that data. So that's what our flexible data model lets you do. And then we also have we also provide in our MDM tooling, like Gary showed and I showed last week too, we're able to do harmonization in that tooling. So this is all going to be this is all capability that you're going to exploit if you make this choice of making entity models here that are referential. Okay. So the other way of thinking about entity modeling is you're actually going to remodel your data for new uses, and you're going to enable those new purposes, those new uses, by, let's say, denormalizing your system of record data into new documents or new forms. You're going to be very maybe even more concerned with provenance and lineage, because you're going to be doing this denormalization and changing the form of your data, and you need to trace where that data has come from. Gary showed you the information timeline in the mastering demo that he just did that showed what happened as data moved through the mastering and merging process. And that same kind of timeline is available from the metadata that MarkLogic provides in its data processing pipelines, which we call flows, and which you saw in action. Whether it's MarkLogic flows or some other sort of orchestration, you still have the choice. You still have to make the choice as you're architecting MDM about, do you want to keep the initial data structures intact, or can you create new data structures? Is there a more useful way of consuming the data that you want to master in your MDM system? For instance, here, I took that customer and order information and I denormalized it into one sort of order document that includes, you can see up here, a bunch of these, some properties. It's a very truncated view here, obviously, but this, I put up for illustration, this last name property is a property from a customer address record, right? And, or from a customer record. And then the start date property is actually from a sort of sales item, order item line. So these kind of, this kind of denormalization and transformation, you know, can provide new uses of data from the MDM system. And that's one of the benefits that people look to get out of MDM, these new data uses. So the third choice that I wanted to talk to you about is this choice of registry style MDM versus a kind of a data hub style. With a registry style, you're basically taking all of the metadata about your source, your systems of record, and pushing that into the MDM system and providing, and you can master that that reference data, but you're providing really a kind of a metadata view, read-only view of what's out there in your data landscape. And many people start this way. It's a quick way to get going. Its drawbacks and challenges are that it's sometimes difficult to query this kind of data because it's essentially this kind of contextless metadata. It's very hard to get meaningful results out of joining all this data together, you know, from an MDM client point of view. In other words, what you'd have to do is you'd have to do this joining. You'd have to sort of do your queries, understand the metadata format of all the your source. Your client system needs to know all of the data structures in the metadata, and then it needs to be smart enough to put to join its query results together in a sort of a middle tier and create meaningful business results for the application or the service that is querying it. It's easy to get started with a system like this, and it can provide that sort of first level of business value that you need to get out of an MDM system. But it's hard to grow this, and it's hard to use this approach to provide a very broad level of service. And so that's why people, yeah, right. Okay, so this is a slide about relational scripting context from data. And I mentioned before that the sales order was made up of these tables. I'm not going to go too deeply into this unless I see in the chat that everybody really wants to go into this. But what this is, you know, relational systems will keep track only of the data that it knows that's kind of limited in shape to its physical model. So you have these tables, rows, columns, and there's not a real mechanism there to capture all of the relationships between that data. And so you wind up with having to deal down the road with a data model that looks like this. And the question is, do you want to just sort of perpetuate that data model in the MDM system, or do you want to do some other kind of modeling with it? And the kind of modeling that most of our customers are choosing to do is taking place in these kind of hub style MDM systems. And the hub style system is very much what's enabled by the data hub framework we've been talking about, where you've got these data sources coming into the left, and you've got all the kind of MDM services that we've been talking about provided by the hub in the middle. And then you're consuming your APIs or consuming applications on the right side, bearing reaping the benefits of all that work done in the hub. And the reason why it's useful to have a hub-based system as opposed to the registry system I just mentioned is that you can deal much more easily with schema drift, with new data source, plugging new data sources in, because you're basically keeping all of the raw data in the hub and processing it as you need. The principle here also of economy is that this is a single holistic architecture. A hub provides you with a much more holistic, architecturally simple kind of entity to deal with. So also in the hub systems, you have the capability to do your data models incrementally. So the source, if you have crucial business processes being driven off those systems of record, those processes can stay in place, and they can stay there as you model your data hub. And if you have a hub, as opposed to just a series of different tables that you have to join together, and you have models in your hub that provide denormalized views of crucial business objects that are important to the business, you then can start to audit the way all those things are put together, and you also have this kind of secure platform for sharing all of those new business objects you're creating. So the other aspect of having a data hub is if it's a transactional data hub, it's now providing an operational bridge between the sort of observe the business side of your business and the run the business side of your business, where typically, you had this big bridge of components that join those two sides of your business, so that all of the stuff on the left side, which was the run the business side, was producing data, furious production of data in all different formats and to all different purposes. And then the right side of that scenario, which is the observe the business data, which is very important for making timely decisions. Do I have to bring on more shipping personnel in my warehouse because I have these orders coming in, for instance? That piece of it becomes much more closely tied to the run the business side if you've got a hub like this that can make sense of all the different data that's being put out by the run the business side of things. So all this messaging, streaming, all this billing stuff and payments, all this can be managed in a real-time operational transactional way in an operational data hub. And MarkLogic, so really these are the that's good, because I'm done with this section and it's a good place to stop. So those were the architectural sort of patterns that I wanted to provide, and hopefully that sparks discussion and gives you some ways to think about putting your own MDM systems together. So I want to thank you, and see you in the rest of the talks.